Nobody ever ventured into the woods past the old quarry, not in winter. Locals said it swallowed people whole. But one frostbitten evening, a reclusive hermit with no reason to trust the world stumbled upon a shivering girl lying beneath a pine tree. She had no shoes, no voice, and no name. What began as a simple act of kindness turned into a mystery that would unravel buried secrets, heal old wounds, and shake the life of a man who thought he had nothing left to lose. You're watching Storytelling and Beyond, where every story reveals more than meets the eye. Subscribe now and join us on heartfelt journeys that stay with you long after the story fades. Tap the bell so you never miss a moment. The wind howled like a wild animal over the ridges of Whitlow Valley. Snowflakes darted sideways through the air, clinging to the bark of trees and gathering in thick, unforgiving mounds along the winding trail. In the middle of that frozen silence, a man named Thatcher trudged through knee-deep drifts with nothing but a lantern in one hand and a walking stick in the other. He was tall, bearded, with eyes like the embers of a long-cold fire. His coat was patched in 3 different places, and his boots had seen 2 wars, one in the world and one in his own bones. His old hound Rusty, graying around the ears but still sharp as a whistle, barked once and darted ahead. "Where you going, boy?" Thatcher muttered, following through the underbrush. The path here hadn't been cleared in years, but he knew the turns like the back of his hand. He hadn't lived up in these hills for 2 decades just to get turned around by a dog with a hunch. Then he saw it, barely a flicker in the snow's grip. Something dark against the tree line. Rusty barked again, circled it once, then sat, ears perked. Thatcher narrowed his eyes. What in God's name? It was a child. A girl. Curled like a fallen bird beneath the arch of an old pine tree, knees to chest, arms wrapped tight around a filthy canvas bag. Her hair clung to her cheeks, matted and wet. Her lips were the shade of bruised lilacs. No coat thick enough for the weather. No boots on her feet. Thatcher dropped to his knees. "Hey now. You hear me, little one?" The girl didn't respond, but her eyes fluttered, unfocused. "You're freezing," he whispered, more to himself than to her. He pulled the wool blanket from his pack and wrapped it around her shoulders. "We can't stay out here. You'll die." Still no answer. Thatcher didn't ask questions. He just scooped her up, light as a bundle of twigs, and carried her back through the snowstorm, Rusty padding silently behind. His cabin stood crooked near the ridge, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. He burst through the door, snow swirling in behind him. "Ma," he called out. "Get the hearth going. We've got a soul near frozen to death." In the corner, his mother stirred. A small woman with silver hair tied in a loose bun, her hands twisted from age and arthritis, sitting in the old rocking chair with a shawl over her lap. Stroke had stolen her legs, but not her mind. She blinked as Thatcher laid the girl near the fireplace. "Dear heaven," she whispered. Thatcher stripped off the girl's soaked outer layer, careful not to wake her fully, and wrapped her in dry wool. He set a kettle to boil, added logs to the fire, then knelt and gently dabbed her forehead with a damp cloth. Rusty lay curled beside her protectively. "What's she doing all the way out there?" his mother asked. Thatcher didn't reply. He didn't have answers. All he had was a sleeping stranger with frostbitten fingers and a face that looked too thin, too pale, too tired for someone so young. Hours passed. The fire crackled. The kettle whistled low and soft. His mother hummed an old hymn under her breath, as if trying to coax warmth into the room through memory alone. Finally, as the clock struck past midnight, the girl stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and alert. She gasped and tried to sit up, only to collapse again. "Shoo," Thatcher said gently. "You're all right. You're safe now." The girl looked around, confused, scared. Her fingers clenched the blanket like it was the last real thing she had left. "I'm Thatcher. That's my ma. You're in our home. Just rest." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. "You don't need to talk," the old woman said, leaning slightly forward. "You're home for the night." The girl blinked slowly, as if trying to decide whether or not to believe them. Then she whispered, hoarse as gravel, Lena. Lena, Thatcher repeated softly. All right then, Lena. You're going to be all right. He offered her a cup of warm broth. She sipped it slowly, watching the two of them with wide eyes. Rusty rested his head against her side, and she gave him the faintest of smiles. In the quiet of the night, Thatcher sat by the fire, watching her drift back to sleep. He didn't know where she came from. Didn't know what she'd seen or what she was running from. But he knew what it meant to be lost. And he wasn't about to let her disappear again. The morning sun filtered through the frosted windows, casting long pale beams across the wooden floor. The wind had died down, leaving behind a world wrapped in white silence. Inside the cabin, the fire still flickered gently, and the scent of simmering oats filled the air. Lena stirred beneath the layers of wool blankets. Her small frame was curled on the cot Thatcher had pulled close to the fireplace. When she sat up, slowly and cautiously, her eyes swept the room as if unsure whether it had all been a dream. Across the room, Thatcher stood at the wood-burning stove, stirring a pot with one hand and holding a chipped mug in the other. He looked over his shoulder and nodded when he saw her awake. Mornin'. Hungry? Lena hesitated. Then gave a small nod. He ladled a bowl of oatmeal and set it on the table near the fire. He added a spoonful of honey and a splash of milk. Nothing fancy. But it was warm, and it smelled like comfort. Lena approached the bowl slowly. She didn't eat right away, she watched him, as if waiting for a signal or permission. You don't have to be scared here, he said without turning around. We don't bite. And we don't ask more than you're ready to give. The girl sat down, and with her fingers shaking ever so slightly, she began to eat. Each spoonful was slow, deliberate, like someone rediscovering how to be full again. Thatcher's mother wheeled herself into the room in her creaky old chair, a shawl draped around her shoulders. Good to see you up, child, she said kindly. You sleep all right? Lena nodded once, wiping her mouth. Well, that makes two of us. He snored like a mountain bear all night, the old woman added with a sly grin, nudging her head toward her son. Lena looked startled at first, then let out the tiniest sound. A chuckle. It was so faint it could have been missed. But it lit up the old woman's face. Ah, see that, she said, pointing triumphantly. That's the first sound of life I've heard from you. We'll get the rest of it soon enough. Thatcher smiled but stayed quiet. He had learned long ago not to force words out of people. Especially not broken ones. When breakfast was over, he offered Lena a thick sweater from his trunk. It swallowed her thin frame, the sleeves hanging past her fingers, but she didn't seem to mind. Come on, he said gently. I want to show you something. She followed him outside, her boots crunching in the snow. The sky was a clear, endless blue, and icicles sparkled on the eaves of the cabin like frozen chandeliers. He led her behind the house, where a small barn leaned tiredly against the tree-line. Inside were his traps, a few tools, and shelves filled with jars of preserves and dried herbs. But in the corner, wrapped in canvas and sealed in wax, was something she hadn't expected, paintings. She walked over, drawn like a moth to flame. They were scenes of the forest, skies painted in soft oranges, elk herds near frozen streams, trees bending in the wind. Some were peaceful. Some looked like memories. You did these? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Long time ago, Thatcher replied. Back when the world made a little more sense. She reached out to touch one, then paused. Why'd you stop? He looked at her for a moment, then shrugged. Didn't see the point anymore. Lena didn't say anything at first. But her eyes were different, brighter, more awake. Then she said something that surprised him. You should start again. He raised an eyebrow. Yeah? She nodded. They're beautiful. Even the sad ones. He studied her, curious how someone so young could read so much between brushstrokes. Back in the cabin, Thatcher's mother sat by the fire, knitting something in quiet rhythm. When they returned, Lena settled beside her without being asked. She handed the old woman her needles. I used to help my gran, she said softly. before she got sick. The old woman gave her the biggest smile yet. Well, maybe you can help these old hands finish this scarf, then. They're not as fast as they used to be. Lena began looping the yarn expertly between her fingers, and the two of them fell into easy silence. Thatcher watched them from the corner, leaning against the wall with arms folded. He didn't know where Lena came from. He still didn't know what chased her into the woods or what hurt she carried in that little canvas bag. But in that moment, watching her warm up to a world she had probably given up on, he realized something simple and quiet. She wasn't just a girl they had rescued. She was someone they needed, too. That evening, as the wind picked up again and darkness settled over the snowy hills, the cabin glowed with soft firelight and the scent of stew wafted through the small kitchen. The silence between the three of them was no longer uncomfortable, it had taken on the texture of something calm, something shared. Thatcher sat at the table, his hands working slowly on a leather strap, while Lena rested by the hearth, her legs curled beneath her as she scribbled in a small notebook Thatcher had found in the bottom drawer of his mother's old writing desk. It had been untouched for years, but now the pages breathed with her neat, silent writing. She hadn't said much all day, but her eyes were brighter now, sharper, watchful. Thatcher's mother was humming softly in her rocker, knitting as she always did, her hands moving by memory more than sight. From time to time, she'd glance over at Lena and smile. It was the kind of evening none of them realized they had missed until they were living in it again. Then the knock came. 3 short, deliberate raps at the cabin door. Thatcher froze mid-motion. Rusty growled low from his spot near the door. No one ever came this far up the ridge. Not without a reason. Not in winter. He rose slowly, glancing first at his mother, then at Lena, who had gone completely still. He walked to the door and pulled it open with cautious strength. 2 men stood outside, wrapped in dark coats, boots coated in snow. One tall and wiry, the other broader, with a deep scar running from ear to chin. Their eyes weren't friendly, though they wore practiced smiles. "Evening," the tall one said. "Sorry to drop in unannounced. Heard there was someone up this way who might have found a lost girl." Thatcher's jaw tightened. "Ain't seen anyone who's lost." The broader man's eyes drifted past Thatcher's shoulder into the cabin. "That so?" The tall one pushed a bit more. "There's a reward. Her folks are worried sick. Said she ran off into the forest near Bramble Hollow. That's just a few miles downhill." Thatcher didn't move from the doorway. "If someone's missing a child, they should try the sheriff." "Oh, we have," the man said, his smile tightening. "Just trying to do the right thing. Thought maybe you'd seen something." Behind Thatcher, Lena had disappeared from the fire's edge. She stood pressed against the cabin wall near the pantry, silent, eyes wide with fear. The old woman wheeled herself forward. "She's not ready to go back to whoever sent her running through a forest barefoot in a snowstorm," she said, her voice strong and clear. The tall man's eyes narrowed. "She tell you that?" "No," the woman replied calmly. "She didn't have to." Thatcher looked at them, jaw set. "You've got no business here. Now I suggest you head back down before the ridge gets too slick to walk." The 2 men exchanged a look. Then the broad one shrugged. "We'll be back." "Not without a warrant," Thatcher replied, and shut the door. He bolted it, then drew the curtain across the window. For a long moment, no one spoke. Rusty returned to his place near the hearth but kept one eye on the door. Then Lena whispered, "They're not my parents." Thatcher turned slowly. "You sure?" She nodded. "They were the men who used to come to the place I stayed. The one with locks on the inside." The room fell into thick silence. His mother reached for Lena's hand. "You're safe now. You hear me? You're not going anywhere with men who look at a child like she's property." Lena's lip trembled, but she didn't cry. She sat beside the old woman, curling against her arm like a bird finding a branch. Thatcher stood for a long while, staring at the door. He wasn't just protecting a stranger anymore. He was protecting family. The next morning brought more than snowfall, it brought resolve. Thatcher was up before the sun, chopping wood in the stillness outside, steam curling from his breath. Each swing of the axe echoed into the trees, sharp and deliberate. He wasn't just cutting firewood. He was preparing. Watching. Thinking. Inside, Lena stood beside the cabin window, watching him in silence. She held her notebook in one hand, her fingers curled around it like a lifeline. She hadn't slept much. The memory of the two men, their faces, their voices, still echoed in her head like a bad dream. But it was the first time in years that the fear hadn't made her run. That had to mean something. Thatcher's mother stirred from her corner, eyes flicking toward the girl. "You can't run your whole life, you know," she said gently. Lena nodded. "I don't want to anymore." "Good," the old woman said, wheeling herself toward the table. "Because my son? He doesn't stop once he decides to protect someone. Even if it means building a wall out of snow and firewood." Lena smiled faintly. It felt strange. But good. Later that afternoon, Thatcher returned from a short trek to the creek and brought news. "I found their tracks. They circled back last night. Camped near Miller's Bluff. They're waiting." Lena's shoulders tensed. "They'll come back." "They will," he said calmly. "But they won't find what they're looking for." Thatcher knelt and unfolded a map of the valley, spreading it across the table. His finger pointed to a small shaded area near the eastern ridge. "There's an old ranger station out here. Used to belong to my uncle. Still has a radio. I'll take you there tomorrow, first light. We'll contact the sheriff ourselves. Someone honest." Lena looked from the map to him. "What if they get here before we leave?" "Then they'll wish they hadn't," he said flatly. That night, the cabin was locked tighter than ever. Candles were used instead of lamps, and the fire was banked low to keep the smoke from drawing attention. They ate in near silence, ears tuned to every groan of the wind. Lena sat on the floor beside Rusty, her notebook open on her knees. She drew quietly images of pine trees, of firelight, of three people in a small cabin where it was warm. Safe. When Thatcher looked over her shoulder and saw it, he didn't say a word. He just nodded once, then slipped a second log into the fire. Near midnight, there was movement outside. Rusty growled again, standing tall this time. Thatcher picked up the shotgun from its place above the mantel. A faint creak came from the porch, boots pressing down on old wood. Then a knock. Not 3 raps this time. Just one. Then silence. Thatcher moved to the door slowly and opened it with the barrel resting in one hand. But it wasn't the men. It was Sheriff Tom Havers from Briar County. Hat in hand, scarf around his neck, and boots crusted with snow. "Heard a report about 2 fellas harassing homesteads up the ridge," the sheriff said. "Your name came up. Everything all right here?" Thatcher looked back at Lena, who had stepped into view from the hallway. Her eyes met the sheriff's. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she stepped forward, head held high. "No," she said clearly. "They're not who they say they are." The sheriff looked at her, then nodded. That's all I needed to hear. By morning, the men had been picked up on trespassing and suspicion of trafficking. Lena gave her statement from the ranger station 2 days later, her hand steady as she signed her name. It wasn't over. But it was a beginning. Back at the cabin, Thatcher fixed a frame and hung her drawing on the wall near the hearth. It was of a man, an old woman, a dog, and a girl sitting around the fire. Not as strangers. But as something more. Home. The days that followed were quiet, but not in the way they had been before Lena arrived. The quiet now was full of gentle routines, the kind that stitched themselves into memory. Mornings began with the smell of fresh bread or fried potatoes, and evenings ended with firelit stories or soft laughter over half-knitted scarves and crooked drawings. Lena was different now. Still cautious, still guarded, but no longer brittle. She helped Thatcher's mother with chores, learned to feed the chickens, and even coaxed Rusty into playing fetch with her, though he still insisted on bringing back pine cones instead of sticks. One afternoon, while Thatcher was out checking traps, Lena and the old woman sat at the kitchen table, piecing together a puzzle someone had abandoned years ago. The old woman paused and looked at her. "You've been writing again, haven't you?" she asked, gesturing toward Lena's notebook on the shelf. Lena nodded shyly. "A little." "About us?" "Yes," Lena whispered. "You going to let us read it someday?" Lena smiled. "Maybe. When it's finished." The door creaked open just then, and Thatcher stepped inside, shaking snow from his coat. He looked at the two of them and smiled in that quiet way of his, as if taking a picture in his mind to hold on to. That night, after dinner, Lena sat near the fire with her notebook open. Thatcher glanced over. "Writing again?" "Just finishing something," she replied, pen moving steadily. He didn't ask what. Instead, he walked over to the fireplace and carefully reached up to the mantel. From behind the old clock, he pulled down a wrapped canvas. "What's that?" Lena asked. He unwrapped it and revealed a painting, unfinished but full of life. A clearing in the woods, a cabin in the distance, smoke rising gently from the chimney. A girl's silhouette near the trees, small and alone, but facing the cabin. "It's you," he said softly. "The day I found you." Lena's breath caught in her throat. "I thought I'd forgotten how to paint," he added. "But you reminded me." She stood, walking over slowly, and touched the edge of the canvas with reverence. "It's beautiful." He looked down at her. "So are second chances." The old woman chuckled from her chair. "And don't you both forget it." Outside, the snow had started again, wrapping the world in fresh silence. But inside the cabin, there was warmth. There was purpose. There was healing. And there was hope. Thanks for watching this heartwarming tale of redemption and unexpected family. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Storytelling and Beyond. Your support helps us bring more beautiful stories to life every week.